Thank you so much, Professor Shireen Musfi, for those very, very kind remarks and also that exhortation in the end to renew or rather I should say continue our efforts even more strongly in the domain of what we call popular and public history, our version of it, which is to get the high academic stuff out there in a popular way, not what others mean. Now, my address today is actually in the domain of contemporary history strictly, because I'm taking up the period of 1947-48, right after independence. It's on the theme of Swaraj and Nation-Building, struggle, vision, transformations. I'm going to take you back to the year 1947 when India became independent. The transition from colonial rule to independent statehood can be mapped across a spectrum of contexts. Of these many contexts, I have chosen 4 domains to make my point today about the nature of this transition. To argue that what took place was not a mere transfer of power, a deal between two bourgeoisies, imperial and local, but a revolutionary transformation. Revolutionary in the terms of content. In fact, a revolutionary transformation which belies, and please note this point, which belies the apparent continuity of form of some institutions. Now, one domain is the civil service, a pillar of the colonial state, now reinvented as an instrument of nation building. The second is the making of the Constitution in a widely consultative process which has little parallel in history. Those of you who have read Rohit Dey's book will be, have looked into this aspect of the widely consultative process by which this was done. The third and most important, perhaps from my point of view and my interest, is the shift of the Congress from being a multi-class movement to a more regular party, as it were. Whereas the fourth domain is related to the third, namely the setting up of a secular state, a newborn state as it was called, on the ruins of a colonial state structure. So the first story is about the transformation of the civil services from being the steel frame of the Raj to an instrument of nation building. From being a pillar of the colonial state, it comes to serve the newly independent state. The political leadership and the civil services, who were on opposite sides of the political spectrum for long, now come to work together to set up a new state, or rather to set a new state on the rails. Indian civil servants were retained, that is the old ICS. They were offered some small compensation. The danger of conservatism, which many have spoken about in the continuity of the ICS, was considered to be less than the threat of an administrative void, already huge because of the way colonial rule had ended in what historians have rightly called a scuttle. In fact, some have called it a shameful flight. The broader historiographical intention is to question the generalizations which have been made about continuities between colonial and post-colonial regimes, in which the retention of the ICS as IAS by the political establishment is offered as proof that nothing has changed. Here we have the views more of political scientists than historians proper, T.V. Sar Satyamurthy and others. But this view is very much put forward in terms of to show that nothing really changed at the end of colonialism. I'll just remind you that this is the C.A. Bailey line to kind of blur the beginning and end of colonialism by kind of smoothening that the lines between the pre-colonial and the post-colonial. I think Indivar Kamtekar also somewhere has written on this aspect of the ICS in terms of continuity. The view is that, another view often given is that ICS was retained by the right wing in the Congress, particularly Sardar Patel is mentioned, to shore up conservatism. A more extreme variant would conclude that the continuity of administrative structures implied the absence of a revolutionary takeover in 1947. That is, this is proof that nothing changed. My argument is that the ICS often stepped into the role the party was expected to play, but could not do so after its weakening with the death of Gandhiji, the diminution of the influence naturally of Gandhians who retreated to their ashrams, and the exit of the socialists from the Congress in 1948. So the bureaucracy is increasingly relied upon, particularly by Nehru and the political leadership, to taking the space or playing the role which the party would have played in other circumstances. The only political scientist of note whom I have found who sees the retention of the ICS is not surprisingly Atul Kohli. He sees this retention as positive and says that it gave a foundation to the new polity. B.K. Nehru, himself ICS, makes the critical point that Jawaharlal Nehru, who was initially not in favor of retaining the ICS, was converted to Sardar Patel's way of thinking on its utility soon after independence. So this questions the widespread perception among administrators and even laypersons alike that except for Sardar Patel, Congress leaders undervalued administrators in the years following independence. The point of departure for me is the life story of H.M. Patel, ICS, Cabinet Secretary in 1947, who went on to carry out key tasks assigned to him by the political leadership. As was mentioned by the chair earlier, I had access to his papers and in Anand, and I was asked by the family to kind of ghostwrite in a way complete his memoirs and a book on partition that he had left unfinished, which came out in 2004-5, I think, as Rites of Passage, a civil servant remembers. So the story of transformation then is not that a layperson type of story that you had ICS as these die-hard toadies who became nationalists in 1947. But in the long run, you had the evolution of a nationalist inclined or minded civil servant. So it's not a sudden change, which happens like the British say, oh, the Indians always worship the rising and not the setting sun. So now the Congress is in power, so obviously they're going to be there. Nothing like this. I think Parthasarathi Gupta is very good on this to show that at least for 10 years before independence, the attitude of the ICS, how it is changing. So from the early 1930s and certainly by the mid 1930s, civil servants started to express their nationalism in diverse ways, ranging from resigning from the service, you know about Subhash Bose and others, to introducing pro-nationalist elements in their decision making, be it notings in the files in the economic departments or court judgments, or even silent covert support to the movement and its activists. The last was brought home to us in our interviews, which we did in the 1980s with Professor Bipin Chandra and Mridula Aditya here, on the basis of which India's struggle for independence was written. So in these interviews, many of the interviewees spoke of jailers being sympathetic and clandestine support being given by senior civil servants at the time that they were underground during the 1942 movement. And here I'm only mentioning Sucheta Kriplani, my namesake, and her story about H.V.R. Iyengar, who was Home Secretary in Bombay Presidency, and Sucheta Kriplani, who was then Sucheta, it's a Bengali name, I forget, Banerjee? Majumdar. Huh? Majumdar. Thank you. So she was, she went to meet him and he said, I will give you safe passage to the border of Bombay. Go down and there's car is waiting. It's my official car, so no one will suspect you. So imagine, Home Secretary of Bombay Presidency, and she's taken to the borders of what was then Bombay Presidency, and she goes off. They had H.V.R. Iyengar and her family had very close relationship. Another thing to be noticed is that societal consensus on the nation-building agenda had evolved by 1947. Now, whether it is a strong economy, a centralized state, an independent polity in the framework of socialism and democracy, you find that these seem to be now across the board, including even, I would say, a section of capitalists who would also be part of this. So in the memoirs, as I said, I charted the rites of passage in the life of a civil servant. And there are many references to this. I'm not going to take it up further, but from 1937 in particular, and a lot of examples are given by Epstein, by Hunt and Harrison in their book on the district officer in India, how just what Krishna Sopti has very beautifully in one of her stories used the title Sikka Badal Gaya. So that change that is coming in that period. Okay, now if we want to understand the role played by the bureaucracy and the political leadership, the way they interwove seamlessly into each other, I think the best example of that is Delhi in September 1947. This is when the center did not hold. Delhi was on the verge of collapse. Many of you know about this. Daylight murders in public places. People would come in and murder patients in the Safdarjung Hospital, for example. Even those were not safe places. Refugees in the camps, and almost the entire Muslim population of Old Delhi had come out and taken refuge in Purana Killa. Now, as the Deputy High Commissioner of Britain wrote, there was a conspiracy or a plot, he said, by Hindu and Sikh fascist forces who were out to destabilize the government, in which particularly the princely states were very much involved. This is something which now we have added a lot to this, and you, ma'am, mentioned our book on RSS. So just to do a little bit of publicity, a revised edition of it, which particularly focuses on what was happening in 47, and of course the later part will bring all this story, revise the story and bring it further. All I wanted to mention here was that the long passages or the accounts that Gyanendra Pandey has given in his book Remembering Partition about how the Congress didn't care for the Muslim refugees, and they were being given rations by the High Commissioner of Pakistan, and they were being told, you must leave for Pakistan, you cannot stay on here, and that Sardar Patel went and said the Muslims should leave the camps and make space for Hindu refugees. This account, I think, is certainly needs to be very seriously questioned in the light of what I have talked about today. Okay, I'm going to have to hurry. Maybe I'll just talk about one or two things. The second context that I'm taking up is the institution of the Constituent Assembly. Now, here again, the issue is one of representation. Diverse groups and communities are seeking representation. It's not only a question of Hindu, Muslim, Muslim League, Congress at this time. The imminence of freedom and sovereignty elicited demands for claims to a special status by many groups and communities. There are representations that I came across, for example, from Nagas, from Jains, depressed classes, of course, Adivasi groups, Catholics, Gurkhas. You know, the range is amazing. What I'm emphasizing here is that the Constituent Assembly was not merely a body for drawing up the Constitution by experts. I already mentioned that that was being done by a wide political consensus or consultation, but it was a political body. Do remember, it is the Parliament, and there are the future shape of the Indian polity. That was the theme on which the major debates and discussions were being held. What will be the nature of center-state relations? What about the autonomy of provinces vis-a-vis the center? Very vexed issue, again taken up. Fundamental rights which remain important till today. Again, the whole issue of the right to practice religion as a fundamental right. Very problematic issue, as you can see at this time. This is right on the ruins of partition, violence and displacement and migration on that huge scale. So to accept or to argue for and institute religion, the right to practice religion as a fundamental right was seen and even presented by some people like the Hindu communalist groups, that you are appeasing the minorities, that it is this appeasement which led to partition. But actually behind it, it was that the minorities who had not walked out, who had not voted with their feet for Pakistan, as you know, only a certain number of people left. Most people stayed behind. It was to reassure the minorities about the secular credentials of the state. So the committees that discussed these issues, on the one hand, they clearly said no separate electorates. But on the other hand, there was a fascinating diversity of opinion on the nature and terms of safeguards which were to be provided for minorities. And when we say minorities, then we are going beyond the Muslims to other groups also. On another line of ideology, that is, if we look at the social sector, the abolition of zamindari was something again which reflected, it came up a major issue in the Constituent Assembly. And the zamindars were very vocal in showing that we have done a lot of developmental work and we should be represented. So that should be taken into account. Zamindari should not be abolished in total. At the other hand, there were Nehru and other socialists who had been demanding the abolition of zamindari and nationalization for many years, and who believed that only on the foundation of abolition of zamindari would economic reconstruction of free India take place. So, we hear of Hazrat Mohani in the context of opposition to Pakistan demand. But it should not surprise you, but it is very interesting that Hazrat Mohani was one of the very vocal people who spoke up, for example, for a new type of organization of the states in India. He said the provinces should no longer be provinces in the old style, they should be republics. And, so there were a lot of different types of ideologies and political issues that were taken up. Here, I just wanted to say that the Minority Rights Subcommittee is something which is very, very important, and wanted to remind you of the fact that this was looked after by Sardar Patel. So even that whole perception we have of Patel as a Hindu communalist, it might be something that we might need to nuance a bit. Now, the third context that we've taken up, the third domain, is how the Congress party, from being a broad anti-colonial platform, how it is fashioned to being a regular party which could lead the country in the post-independence years. And here it's important to remember that as early as 1946, these issues came up. What will be the new basis for membership? What will be the ideological orientation of the party? Will it be secular or communal? Both kinds of views are very strong. Will it go in a socialist direction, or should the socialists exit and leave the Congress to be a right-wing party? Should the party be pro-Hindu? So in this way, we find that from mid-1946 onwards, there are in the AICC papers a whole host of letters which are coming in to the Congress president about this. And I'm just mentioning one of those, Raipur CP, that Central Provinces meaning Madhya Pradesh today, or now it's Chhattisgarh, of course. M.A. Yezdani, who was the president of the Hindu-Muslim Unity League there, who wrote to Kriplani, the Congress president, saying that now we need to ensure that every Indian community which exists worth a name in our common motherland, they have to be represented. And the reactionary coterie of Muslim League, consisting of Changiz Khans, head-hunting cannibals, it's all very sort of over-dramatic, Noros and Firoz, has actually crossed the margin when it decides to boycott, assault and murder the nationalist Muslims. So basically there is this constituency of the nationalist Muslims who have given their all for the Congress, and they are protesting that by accommodating the Muslim League, which, the Congress had to, because they, after all, those Muslims who did not go to Pakistan, they were not to be ignored, that how that was something which is going to jeopardize the secular character of the Congress. On the other hand, there was the type of letter, again I'm just quoting one line, which says, you must look after the interest of the Hindus. And this letter goes somewhere like this. He says, are you aware of the tragedy to the Congress in the very strongholds of UP, of Congress? There's definitely something wrong with the policy somewhere. Take care. And he's writing to Kriplani. You may not be the first president of the Congress when Congress power started waning. It's fast waning. This is the time you act promptly after finding out the root causes. You are brave. Decide and do act. Don't be afraid of any section. Do the right and fear none, even if he is Mahatma Gandhi. Now that's very interesting. If you can't act. And then he goes on to say, Hindus are dissatisfied with you in Kanpur and nobody joined them over there. We had a thing. If the Congress does not care for the majority section, it is digging its own grave. The day will not be far to see when it will be at the deathbed. Hindu Mahasabha will rise. So you can see of course, some of it sounds like, people might have been writing this today or 10 years back, whether it was waning of the Congress influence or saying you must be more Hindu and, etc. I'm not reading it out, but Raghukal Tilak, who was a prominent congressman from UP, and he's someone, in fact, who had put forward a very interesting ideas and said how we cannot leave the Muslims to their own fate. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the Hindu majority. So he tries to bring it all together. I am just going to mention here Gandhiji's role in this, which is that sometime in 1946, at the end of 46, when Gandhiji is in Noakhali, R.R. Divakar, who was a secretary of the Congress and very much involved with the reorganization, visits him there. And Gandhiji says, yes, we have to talk about the future of the Congress. We have to, and then there's a note which is drawn up and which talks about how Swaraj is over. Now we have to work for economic Swaraj, for a society based on social equity and justice. So this is a note called Future of the Congress, a draft note which was to come up in Bombay in September 1946 at the AICC session. And you have very interestingly, given his later stand, Ram Manohar Lohia, if you remember, wrote a book called Guilty Men of India's Partition, where he criticized Nehru and all others of being tired and hungry for power, and he was totally dismissive. At this point, he penned a 15-point note where he said, the time has come when Congress should change its creed. What is it? The Congress should declare as its creed the achievement of the socialist state. In furtherance of this, the Congress should make structural alterations in its constitution, and along with its village and Congress committees, it should annex to itself workers' organizations and so forth. Now, those of you remember, we are going back to Nehru and the 30s, where Nehru had said we should have the workers' organizations and the Kisan organizations, and that type of collective affiliation had been ruled out. So it's very fascinating that this thing. In contrast, Jayaprakash Narayan, whom Nehru, as you know, set a lot of store by, he thought at some time he would be his successor. Jayaprakash wanted that the socialists should leave the Congress because Congress was not going to do this, and they should have their own party. So what's important for us here today is that this entire discussion on a new type of constitution that should come up and a new type of party, Gandhiji is sitting in Birla House shortly before, in fact, one day before he is murdered, he's assassinated, and he writes what he calls the draft constitution of the Congress. This is on 29th January 1948. And what does he write in this? He says that the Congress should now become an organization of sevaks. You might recall, some of you, he uses the word Lok Sevak Sangh, that AICC resolves, and that's the resolution, hasn't happened yet. It resolves to disband the Congress organization and flower into a Lok Sevak Sangh. Now, interestingly, this note that Gandhiji writes and gives to the General Secretary of the Congress on the morning of his assassination. But the public come to know of it only when the newspaper comes out on 2nd February 1948, a few days later. And what do his comrades, what do Gandhiji's colleagues, Kaka Kalelkar and the other editors, what do they put as a heading over there? They call it Last Will and Testament. Gandhiji had not written any last will and testament, but because it was perhaps one of the last things he wrote, they called it Last Will and Testament. And this has been given over time in history a significance larger than its original conception. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is that the rest of the document, this was one part of it, that the rest of the document has been done, is not looked at. And then what's happened, whether it's the Rudolphs or it is Rajmohan Gandhi, they have all picked up this idea that Gandhi had given a call for dissolution of the Congress. Even Amit Shah, whom I would not like to quote in this very august gathering, but even he came out with a statement saying that Gandhi was a Chatur Banya. And he said Gandhi, being a Chatur Banya, knew what was happening in the Congress, and he said its purpose of the Congress is over and it should be dissolved. So this popular mythology that there is about it, popular or academic, so this is something which we need to throw out, I think, because what I'm making very clear is that if you read the rest of what Gandhiji was doing at that time, it will be very clear that it was a very complex position. What does he say? He says he supports the Congress party. He says, I'm quoting from June 1947, about the talents of Jawaharlal, about the Congress. Gandhi says, I can see the warts and the positive features. I know that there are congressmen who want rewards like office for going to jail. But if this sort of mentality persists, I fear the Congress will perish. And then he goes on to talk about how the Congress represents the whole of India. It represents it's dedicated itself to the service of the poorest and the lowliest. And he even talks to his younger son, Devdas, saying that the government is composed of patriots. Okay, I'll wind up, huh? So saying the government is composed of patriots, they will hold together. So what I'm saying is, and then further on, he goes on to say that in the same issue of the Harijan, he says, Indian National Congress, which is the oldest national political organization and which has, after many battles, fought her non-violent way to freedom, cannot be allowed to die. Yeah. Sure. It can only die with the nation. So it's very clear that, on the one hand, he's thinking about Lok Seva kind of, thing, but not talking about dissolving the Congress. Now, last but not least, the fourth domain is about the nature of the Indian state. I'm not going to present this except to say that here I've talked about how there's a lot of pressure on the Congress after the creation of Pakistan, that in the context of the fact that Pakistan is now going to be a theocratic state, there are people, supporters of the Congress, now writing in to say, don't you think that we should have a Hindu Rashtra? Don't you think we should have a Hindu state? And again, interestingly, Nehru, of course, talks about it at different places, but here I'm only quoting, and I've done that earlier in the book, Sardar Patel, who says, no, we will not have a Hindu state, and we will have a state which is going to be oblivious to influenced by any creed or religion. So the point that one is making here is that when I look back upon it today with the Dharam Sansad in Prayagraj, we must remember to call it, coming out with a copy of some Hindu Rashtra constitution, it looks as if, a lot of this is, very prescient, but also one realizes that at a time of partition, the latest figures for migration today are 18 million. They've gone up from 10 million, which we used to talk about for partition. So it's huge, the displacement, everything. So it's a true miracle, the setting up of a secular state on the ruins of a colonial state structure. I'm grateful to the Delhi History Congress for encouraging me to sketch out these 4 canvases with some very broad strokes. And with this encouraging audience, I hope to fill them in some more detail with some maybe finer brushes in the coming days. Thank you.